The terminal indexes are also going to be updated within the 2022 analysis enhancements. And what that is going to look like is including lambing ease within the indexes, of course, only impacting the terminal analysis clients. So why have we been looking at including lambing ease in these indexes? There has been a rising rate of lambing difficulties occurring in the industry over the past few years, and this poses a significant welfare risk to the industry, which we need to be at the forefront of. Reducing this problem will also satisfy the welfare groups and the Australian consumer that ultimately are the people that drive the demand for our product. It was also indicated as a desire in the index review that was recently completed by Sheep Genetics, and of course the producers themselves will also see significant benefit directly by including lambing ease in the indexes, as demonstrated by Andrew Swan in a cost analysis that he completed, which you can see in the table on the right of the screen there. So in this table, you can see in the far right two columns of moderate and hard, which represent a moderate lambing difficulty and a hard difficulty, which translate to a score of 2 or of an easy pull for a moderate difficulty, and a score 3 or hard pull, which is a hard difficulty. So in this analysis, he took into consideration stockman time and the lamb mortalities, and also the cost of ewe mortalities. So when you take into consideration all of those different factors and the time that you put into it for a moderate difficulty, for each difficulty event, a moderate one would cost you $82 in comparison to a hard difficulty, which would cost $144.65. So this is a pretty big cost when it all adds up. And so reducing this problem is definitely something that we want to be able to address moving forward and keep that cost at a minimum. As far as the indexes go that we currently have, they have been built to include the traits post-weaning weight, carcass eye muscle depth, and carcass C-site fat depth, which have got strong correlations with ultrasound measurements taken on farm, which is your eye muscle depth and fat depth there. We've also got lean meat yield, dressing percentage, intramuscular fat, and shear force. The intramuscular fat is the measure of like marbling that can be seen visually, and shear force is the amount of tenderness. So those two are our eating quality traits, which are at varying levels throughout the indexes. And most importantly for today's discussion is lambing ease, which is the lambing ease direct trait, which we're going to be including in these indexes as well. So when considering how we have come about these indexes, we build them based on a selection criteria of traits that we can actually measure. So these would be, your weights that you can take on farm and your scans that you can take on farm, and also the breeding objective that we have that includes the traits of the economic value. So these are the carcass traits, and they're like the end goal, what we're actually going to be paid on having that economic value. And the relationship between the measured traits and the economic traits is what determines the index accuracy. And because we've got high correlations between our carcass traits and our scanned eye muscle depth and fat, for example, these high correlations relate to strong index accuracies there. And of course, for the other traits that might be more difficult for people to measure on farm, they can be done via progeny tests, getting meat science done, submitting sires, to the resource flock, and also nominating yourself to be involved in satellite flocks and things like that. And of course, there is genomic testing available for these traits within the terminal indexes, terminal analysis as well. So how did we come about getting lambing-ease to fix these lambing difficulty problems? So we had a look, just for example here, I've got the terminal carcass production index. We had a look at including at first birth weight, and then as well looking at lambing-ease, which lambing-ease is a more direct measure of the end goal being reducing lambing difficulties. So here in this table on the right, you can see the first column are the different traits that are of interest, where not all of them are in the index as nominated by a little cross there. And the TCP index as it was previously. Then the next column along is the TCP index plus a consideration of birth weight. And in this example, we've included birth weight at an emphasis of 2%, as denoted in the top right square on the left of the page. Then the fourth column along in that table is lambing-ease included in the TCP index at a rate of 4%. And the final column is lambing-ease included at a rate of 9%. That's emphasis. So at first, having birth weight included in the index, you can see that the birth weights, were being reduced in comparison to terminal carcass production, where these individual cell values indicate the response of an animal over time. So what the actual ASBV has changed to. So we can see that including birth weight did reduce that birth weight, but because of the high correlations of birth weight with the other weight traits, there was also reductions in weaning weight and post-weaning weight, which is definitely not something that we want to see, and ultimately it is definitely against the overall economic breeding objective of this index. So to combat this, we had a look at including lambing-ease, and while there was still reductions in birth weight, the reduction in weaning weight and post-weaning weight were not nearly as much. So there wasn't as much of an impact on those growth traits and growth measures. And having it at that level of 4% in comparison to 9%, we decided the 4% was the more optimum level, where we were able to reduce that impact on post-weaning weight, maintain our eating quality measures, maintain yield, and ultimately improve lambing-ease, which is what we wanted to do here. So what does this actually mean? What will the changes be having this come into effect? So here we've got an array of different tables that indicate the correlation between TCP as it was previously without lambing-ease and TCP with lambing-ease at 4% highlighted by the blue squares. So on the top right, where I've highlighted, you can see that we've got a correlation between the previous index and the index as it is now with lambing-ease of 0.974 or 97%, which means it's a really strong correlation. And there's not much re-ranking within animals, which you can see visually in the scatter on the bottom left there in the blue square, where all of the animals are pretty well along the same diagonal line. And the top animals there are still the top and the bottom ones are still the bottom, with some re-ranking in the middle, mainly with those dots that are falling out the bottom, which denote to the animals that actually have a pretty poor lambing-ease score as it is. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. We don't want to be rewarding those animals with poor lambing yeast scores, because even though they might be really high on growth and have really good carcass production, if their lambing yeast score is poor, they might be throwing lambs that aren't even going to survive. And what's the good of growing a lamb if it's, not going to make it past birth anyway? So how do we actually score lambing yeast? This is the lambing yeast score guide. I've pulled out the actual scores themselves from the guide, which is available on our website on the brochures and fact sheets tab under resources. So briefly, what the scores are is a score of 1 would be unassisted, where you were present at the lambing site, but you didn't have to intervene at all. A score 2 is an easy pull, where a slight intervention might be required. A score 3 is a hard pull, so you really had to get in there and significant intervention was required. Then a score 4 is malpresentation, so this could be, your breech, or if the lamb's all tangled up and it just wasn't coming out correctly. And then a score 5 is veterinary assistance, where it was really problematic and you had to get a vet in. Note that if you are not present at the lambing site for that lambing event, and it was unobserved, then you should leave that score as blank or put in a number 0. And we get asked as well, what happens if you don't record lambing ease? Well, lambing ease will still be informed through its correlated traits that include birth weight and gestation length. So if you were able to get out there and collect that birth weight within the 24-hour period for birth weight, then that will still have information flow through, as well as if you've got the birth date and things to come through for that gestation length. Of course, this is just correlated information, which, while it is strong and it will provide that information through the index, the best practice is now to get that lambing yeast score so that you can have it directly contributing through to the ASBV and the index itself. So in summary, which of the analyses will be impacted? Just the terminals, because it's only the terminal indexes that are going to be having this change of including lambing ease, where breeders might see small changes in their current index, where sires that have got poor lambing ease scores will be the ones that are most impacted.